Imagine the moment your world collapses as your parents learn their son, their own flesh and blood, is accused of being a killer, a fugitive after brutally attacking his closest friend. This was the harsh reality that unfolded before the Brandon Ryner family. For 6 hours, Brandon had been on the run from the police, and all his parents could do was pray, waiting for their son's cruel fate. You are about to see what transformed a close friendship into a horrifying tragedy, and how pain and betrayal can tear apart a family and a community. On a cold November morning in 2022, a discarded Toyota Prius was found by police officers in Rome, Georgia. The car was in a creek, leaving a big question mark. Why was this car abandoned here? When the license plate was traced, it was identified as belonging to Aaron Davis, a 21-year-old who had just graduated from Brigham Young University. Aaron, according to his father, had been visiting his longtime friend Brandon. The two had been friends since middle school, and their friendship lasted throughout college. The trip to visit Brandon was supposed to celebrate a new beginning in Aaron's adult life. But since Aaron left for Brandon's house, no one had heard from him, and his phone always went straight to voicemail. All these strange mysteries led Aaron's father to file a missing person report, and an official investigation to find Aaron began. But what truly happened on that fateful night? Was Aaron simply sleeping somewhere, or was there a darker secret hidden behind his sudden disappearance? And more importantly, what was the role of Brandon Ryner, Aaron's closest friend, in this story? We will delve into each layer of this case, from the first clues to the chilling evidence, to expose the truth of a horrific crime and explore the hidden corners of the killer's psychology. When the 911 call about an abandoned car came in, officers in Rome, Georgia quickly arrived at the scene. The Toyota Prius lay exposed in a creek, an unusual and suspicious sight. There were no clear signs of an accident, no one inside, just a car inexplicably left in the middle of nowhere. The mysterious abandonment of the car immediately raised big questions. Police checked the license plate and quickly identified the owner as Aaron Davis, a 21-year-old. This led them to important information. Aaron had come to Rome to visit Brandon Ryner, his close friend, and then planned to go to Alabama to meet his girlfriend. But since Aaron left home to go to Brandon's place, no one had been able to contact him. His phone always went straight to voicemail. From a psychological perspective, the sudden disappearance of an individual, especially when all communication channels go silent, often creates a deep sense of unease for loved ones. The silence from Aaron's phone was not just a technical issue. It was a powerful warning signal, a psychological sign that something serious had happened. For Aaron's family, every hour that passed without news was an hour submerged in worry and fear. This feeling, known as fear of the unknown, can torment loved ones more than clear bad news. Fortunately, the town of Rome is relatively small, and the officers were familiar with the name Aaron Davis. This helped speed up the initial investigation. Lieutenant Sailors contacted Aaron's father, who provided more useful details about his son's schedule. Mr. Aaron Davis immediately filed a missing person report, officially launching an investigation to find his son. The abandoned car was not just a piece of evidence. It was the first clue, the door that opened up a case much more complex than police could have imagined. The small lesson learned here is that in complex cases, sometimes the most seemingly trivial clues are the key to unlocking the biggest mysteries. An abandoned car, an unanswered phone call, all can be important signs leading to the truth. And because of these initial details, the investigation quickly led to the last person known to be with Aaron, Brandon Ryner. With the car found and information that Brandon was the last person to see Aaron, investigators knew the next step was to contact Brandon Ryner. They needed to hear his story, to find out what happened in the last hours Aaron was seen. But what they were about to hear would be a carefully staged story, a performance of deception, revealing sophisticated aspects of criminal psychology. With Aaron Davis's car found abandoned and information that he had been visiting Brandon Ryner, investigators knew the first person they needed to talk to was Brandon. Lieutenant Sailors called Brandon, and this first conversation revealed the initial signs of abnormality. Brandon answered the phone calmly, even asserting that he was actively looking for Aaron. He told a story that sounded completely plausible. "We started drinking around 12 p.m. yesterday. Aaron started throwing up a lot. He told me to leave him alone. I guess I woke up around 1 or 2 a.m. and his car was gone. Brandon even volunteered to go to a location he thought Aaron might be to search for him. From an initial perspective, this was a worried friend trying to help." However, for seasoned investigators, this excessive calmness in an emergency situation is often a red flag, a warning sign. In the psychology of deception, experienced liars often try to maintain composure and offer overly logical, too perfect stories. They avoid showing panic or confusion, as that can be a sign of dishonesty. Brandon did not appear frantic or extremely worried, as a close friend should be when his friend mysteriously disappears. This indicated a suspicious emotional detachment. Brandon's calm demeanor and seemingly logical story could be a classic sign of a deceptive individual, skilled at crafting narratives to mislead. A real-world example of this phenomenon can be seen in many criminals interviewed after committing their crimes. They often try to control their emotional responses, rehearsing their story to make it sound convincing, sometimes even adding small details to increase credibility. However, the very absence of natural emotion is the most suspicious thing. In this case, Brandon's claim of actively looking for Aaron was also a way to reinforce the image of a loyal friend, to soothe any suspicion from the police. The lesson here is that what we hear is not always the truth. In criminal investigations, unusual calmness and an overly coherent story can sometimes signal that something is being hidden. Brandon's initial phone call did not completely satisfy the officers. To get deeper answers, they knew they needed to confront Brandon directly, where body language and nonverbal reactions could reveal more than 1,000 words. Therefore, just a few hours later, officers appeared at Brandon Ryner's house without warning. They needed to look him straight in the eye, check his story again, and most importantly, look for evidence that might be right under their feet. And what they were about to discover would expose a horrifying truth, far beyond any initial assumptions. A few hours after the phone call, Rome police officers arrived at Brandon Ryner's house. This time, they wanted to have a direct, face-to-face conversation. When Brandon opened the door, his demeanor had significantly changed from his earlier calmness. Although he still tried to maintain a cooperative appearance, there was an underlying tension in his movements and communication. The officers began to walk around the house to check. Immediately, several details raised their suspicion. Some doors in the house were locked, which was quite unusual for someone claiming to have nothing to hide. In particular, the door leading to the bedroom where Aaron was supposed to have thrown up multiple times was locked. This completely contradicted Brandon's story that Aaron had left during the night. If Aaron had thrown up in the room, why was that room locked, and why were there no signs of it being cleaned? When Brandon was asked to open the room door, a strong smell of cleaning chemicals wafted out. This smell was too strong for just normal cleaning. The officers also discovered a large quantity of newly purchased cleaning supplies, worth hundreds of dollars. This significantly increased their suspicion. Why would so many cleaning chemicals be needed, and why was the smell so strong? But all of that was nothing compared to what they found next. When inspecting the room more closely, officers found significant puddles of blood on the carpet near the bed. There was a significant amount of blood by the bed, more than just throwing up, an officer remarked. This completely refuted Brandon's explanation that Aaron had simply thrown up due to intoxication. That amount of blood could not have come from mere vomiting. It hinted at a serious act of violence. The presence of blood indicated that Aaron was not just intoxicated, but may have been seriously injured or even dead there. From a criminal psychology perspective, the locked door, the strong smell of chemicals, and especially the puddles of blood that had been attempted to be cleaned are all typical behaviors of someone trying to conceal a crime. The odd story from Brandon, the puddles of blood in Aaron's room, the hundreds of dollars worth of cleaning supplies, it seems as though Brandon sensed the officer's suspicion arising. This was not the behavior of a worried friend, but of someone covering up a horrifying secret. The act of cleaning the scene was a desperate attempt to eliminate evidence, a common psychological reaction of those facing the immediate consequences of a violent act. They try to create a clean scene to deceive the police, believing that removing physical evidence will help them escape conviction. However, haste and inexperience often lead to mistakes, such as leaving a strong chemical odor or being unable to completely clean stubborn stains like blood. As soon as Brandon realized that the police were becoming increasingly suspicious, that his act was about to be exposed, instinct and panic took over him. In front of the officers, Brandon made a desperate decision, an action that itself became the strongest evidence of his guilt, a desperate escape. And this behavior will lead us to the next part of the story. As soon as Brandon Ryner felt the net of suspicion tightening, as the officer's gaze seemed to pierce through his calm facade, a primal instinct took over him, the instinct for survival. Despite being directly confronted by the police, Brandon made a reckless and desperate decision. He suddenly turned, jumped over the fence, and ran away from his house. "Oh my God, he's going! He jumped the fence! Head back towards Finewood!" The officer's shouts rang out, signaling an urgent pursuit. Fleeing, especially when directly confronted by law enforcement, is not just a physical attempt to escape. From a criminal psychology perspective, it is often considered a tacit admission of guilt. An innocent person would usually stay and cooperate, believing that the truth would be revealed. Conversely, a guilty person, when cornered, will often choose to flee in haste, regardless of the risk or desperation of the act. Brandon's abrupt decision to flee when confronted with the evidence wasn't just a desperate escape. It was, in the eyes of law enforcement, a tacit admission of guilt, a fundamental psychological response to impending exposure. Panic consumed Brandon. His escape happened in broad daylight, forcing officers into a fierce pursuit. Possible 1043, suspect run back toward. But no matter how many units were dispatched, Brandon still disappeared from police sight, at least at that moment. He successfully escaped, creating a mysterious gap in the investigation and leaving behind a big question. Where did he run off to? And more importantly, what made a person willing to do anything to escape capture? Fugitives often experience a range of intense psychological states, from the initial relief of escaping to continuous fear of being discovered, paranoia, and isolation. Every moment of freedom comes at the cost of extreme insecurity. In Brandon's case, this act of fleeing strongly reinforced police suspicion that he was not only involved in Aaron's disappearance, but was also the perpetrator of a gruesome crime. The lesson learned from this behavior is that the haste and panic of a fugitive often leave clear traces, sometimes even stronger than any confession. This self-betraying behavior becomes living evidence, confirming Brandon's involvement. And when Brandon disappeared, police were forced to shift their investigation, looking for clues from those closest to him, especially his family, who were facing a painful dilemma. The hunt for Brandon Ryner had begun. In a desperate attempt to find any clue about where Brandon might have fled, police began knocking on every door in the neighborhood. And in that effort, they encountered a neighbor talking on the phone with Brandon's father, Jeremy Ryner, a call that would open a difficult new chapter in the investigation. When Brandon Ryner disappeared into thin air, the hunt for him began urgently. Officers went door to door in the neighborhood, looking for anyone who might have seen the direction he fled. In this effort, an officer happened to encounter a neighbor talking on the phone with Jeremy Ryner, Brandon's father. Lieutenant Sailors immediately seized the opportunity, taking over the call to speak directly with Jeremy. Initially, Jeremy Ryner appeared completely unaware of the situation. He believed his son was still at home, and, like the police, he was also worried about Aaron. He even offered to drive around areas Brandon and Aaron frequented to look for Aaron. This initial cooperation was a positive for investigators, who were looking for any clues that could help find both Aaron and Brandon. However, everything would soon change dramatically. After the call with the police, Jeremy returned home to continue searching for Aaron and Brandon. It was here that he found Brandon's phone. This discovery was a major breakthrough for the investigation, as it could contain important clues about where Brandon had gone or what had happened. But when police asked Jeremy to hand over the phone, his cooperation abruptly stopped. Jeremy refused to give up the phone, citing a desire to better understand the situation before doing anything that could disadvantage his son. My gut says yes, but at the same time, yeah. He believed Brandon was innocent until proven guilty, and handing over the phone could be a serious mistake. Jeremy's hesitation revealed a deep psychological dilemma. Jeremy's initial refusal to hand over Brandon's phone exemplifies the agonizing conflict many parents face when confronted with their child's alleged wrongdoing. A deep-seated instinct to protect versus the moral obligation to cooperate with justice. On one hand, he was a father with an instinct to protect his child, unwilling to believe the horrifying accusations. On the other hand, he faced pressure from the law and the need to clarify the truth. Hours passed without further clues about Brandon. What happened during this time when Jeremy kept Brandon's phone remains a mystery. However, when police spoke with Jeremy again, his attitude had changed significantly. When they informed him about a significant amount of blood in Aaron's bedroom, Jeremy seemed shocked. "I know, as a father, understand, all right, well, yeah, I'm going to keep walking." The initial hesitation and wavering had disappeared, replaced by a bewildered and somewhat resigned expression. Although Jeremy did not say it explicitly, it seemed that what he found on the phone, combined with the information about the blood, forced him to confront a terrible truth he could not deny. The lesson from this situation is the psychological burden borne by the suspect's relatives. They are caught between loyalty and truth, often forced to make the most painful choices. Jeremy's decision, though possibly to protect his son, showed a shift in his perception. It seems that what he saw or read in Brandon's phone dispelled any doubts about his son's innocence, leading to a significant turning point in the investigation. And what was on that phone would expose the most horrifying hidden corners of Brandon Ryner's mind. This is also why, as the video emphasized, calling a lawyer is so important, innocent or not. A lawyer will force police to turn over all of the evidence in their possession, forcing police to disclose all evidence, helping the client to present a fair and reasonable defense. That action transforms the interrogation from a psychological battle into a more balanced legal battle. Although Lee Rodarte's conviction brought a sense of justice, haunting questions remain. Why couldn't Savannah's cause of death be determined? This highlights the brutality of Lee's efforts to dispose of evidence. And could the system have done better to prevent similar tragedies? Were there any signs from Lee that the community or Savannah herself could have recognized earlier? The lesson from this verdict is a reminder of the complexity of justice. It's not just about convicting the guilty, but also about learning from human and systemic errors to protect the innocent. It also emphasizes that, in all legal situations, understanding one's rights and having legal support is extremely important. The story of Savannah Gold and Lee Rodarte is a heartbreaking indictment of deception, violence, and the consequences it leaves behind. In the final part, we will review the entire case, drawing the most important lessons for the community and society, so that Savannah's story is not just a tragedy, but also a lasting warning. The story of Savannah Gold and Lee Rodarte is not just an isolated tragedy, but a heartbreaking indictment of deception, violence, and the consequences it leaves behind. It is a reminder that we need to look beyond the verdict to better understand how to prevent similar tragedies in the future. From this case, we can draw several important lessons for individuals and the community. First, it's about recognizing signs of abuse or violence in relationships. Lee and Savannah's story, though not delving deeply into relationship details, still suggests potential control and violence. It's crucial to recognize red flags, especially when there's a power imbalance, such as between a manager and an employee. Second, the importance of healthy communication and conflict resolution. Unresolved conflicts, repressed anger, can erupt into uncontrollable violent behavior. Third, personal safety. While no one can anticipate every danger, it is essential to raise awareness and vigilance, especially in sensitive situations or with individuals exhibiting unusual behavior. And finally, the role of the community. We need to build a society where people are more sensitive to danger signs, willing to listen and intervene when someone needs help. Sometimes a small act of concern can make a big difference. The case of Savannah Gold is a chilling testament to deception, violence, and the importance of justice. It's not just a story to tell, but also a reminder of our collective responsibility in building a safer and more just society. In your opinion, what is the biggest lesson we can learn from this case? What do we as a society need to do to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video if you found it useful, share it so Savannah's story isn't forgotten, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any deep criminal psychology analyses and other compelling stories. Thank you for joining us in exploring this maze of lies. Remember, the truth always finds its way, and hope will always exist. With the undeniable evidence from Brandon's phone, Jeremy Ryner had to face the terrible truth about his son. There was no longer any doubt or possibility of defense. In pain and heartbreak, Jeremy made a painful but necessary decision. He called the police, revealing that he was with Brandon and ready for his son to surrender. About 25 minutes later, Brandon and his parents arrived at the police station, ending the desperate escape. However, Brandon's surrender was only the beginning of the final phase of the investigation. Investigators still needed to find Aaron Davis's body. Although Brandon refused to cooperate, Jeremy himself, in a final effort to do the right thing, provided important information. He tried to direct police to a nearby area, though not entirely certain. "Sir, this is Officer Sailors. Hello, Mr. Jeremy Ryner, homeowner and Brandon's father. We'll probably need to talk to Brandon. Do you know where he is?" "No, I thought he was still home." Finally, information from Jeremy led police to an old cemetery behind a secluded area. And there, among old gravestones and eerie silence, Aaron Davis's body was found. What added to the horror of the discovery was that his body was wrapped inside the very bedsheets he had slept on at Brandon Ryner's house. This discovery was undeniable physical evidence, eliminating any remaining doubt about Brandon Ryner being the cold-blooded killer. The speculation had come to an end. Brandon Ryner was a cold-blooded murderer. Immediately after this discovery, Brandon Ryner was officially arrested for the murder of Aaron Davis and taken to the local jail. Throughout the transport process, officers noted an astonishing behavior from Brandon. He remained eerily calm, seeming completely unfazed or shaken by the entire situation. Officers stated that Brandon remained eerily calm while being transported and seemed completely fazed by the entire situation. Brandon's unusual calmness is an alarming psychological characteristic. While most people would show panic, anxiety, or remorse when arrested for such a heinous crime, Brandon appeared completely indifferent. Brandon's unnerving calm, often described as eerily unfazed, may indicate a profound lack of remorse or empathy, characteristics sometimes associated with severe personality disorders. This lack of emotion can be a sign of a severe personality disorder, where individuals lack the ability to empathize with others' pain and feel no guilt for their actions. For them, the consequences are merely an inconvenience to be dealt with, not a torment of conscience. Finding Aaron's body wrapped in bedsheets from Brandon's house was not only concrete evidence, but also a gruesome symbol of ultimate betrayal. All doubts were cleared, and a young, promising life was extinguished by his own best friend. With Brandon Ryner arrested and the crime exposed, the legal battle began. However, a complex factor was introduced during the proceedings: Brandon's mental health. Would this affect the outcome of the case, or would justice be fully served for Aaron Davis? With Brandon Ryner arrested and Aaron Davis's body found, the focus of the case shifted to the courtroom. However, before justice could be fully served, a complex factor was introduced: Brandon's mental health. In conversations with police, Jeremy Ryner, Brandon's father, revealed that his son had a history of psychological problems. Brandon was diagnosed with anxiety from a young age, accompanied by obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, and what Jeremy described as visions. Jeremy brought Brandon home from college because he was having anxiety attacks and having thoughts, hallucinations. Mr. Jeremy tried to bring Brandon home to be safe and get proper medication. This immediately raised the possibility that Brandon could mount a defense based on his mental state, arguing that he was not fully responsible for his actions due to mental illness. The concept of an insanity plea in the American legal system is an incredibly complex issue. This plea does not aim to deny that the defendant committed the crime, but argues that at the time of the offense, the defendant suffered from a mental disease or defect so severe that they could not appreciate the nature of their actions, or know that the actions were morally wrong. This raises the possibility that his actions may have been influenced by mental instability. Accepting an insanity plea is rarely successful, and the burden of proof is often very high for the defense. Jeremy's testimony, though expressing a father's desire to protect his son, also needs to be considered carefully. It's important to consider the context Jeremy's statements could be an attempt to have Brandon plead insanity in court. Therefore, it's essential to approach these claims with a grain of salt, as they may not fully reflect the reality of the situation. This does not mean Jeremy was lying, but rather that his emphasis on Brandon's mental state could be a legal strategy to reduce the sentence or offer a different perspective on Brandon's motives. This is a difficult situation where parental love and legal truth intersect. It's important to emphasize that not all people with mental illness are prone to violent crime. In fact, the majority of people with mental illness never harm others. However, some severe mental disorders, especially when undiagnosed and untreated, can impair judgment, impulse control, and perception of reality, thereby increasing the risk of violent behavior in extreme cases. Understanding this connection requires sensitivity and in-depth research, avoiding any stigmatization. Despite the arguments about Brandon's mental state, ultimately, the compelling evidence spoke for itself. The jury had to make a decision, and the outcome would close one of the most heartbreaking true crime cases, bringing justice for Aaron Davis and his family. The debate about Brandon Ryner's mental state was presented, but ultimately, the weight of the evidence against him was too great. The trial heard all sides, examined the gruesome details, and compared them with Brandon's medical records. However, the insanity plea argument was quickly rejected. On July 18, 2024, a verdict was rendered in the courtroom. Brandon Ryner had no way to deny his crime. He pleaded guilty to murder and concealing the death of Aaron Davis. The judge handed down the sentence. "I come to the conclusion that justice demands Mr. Ryner be sentenced to life without parole on count 1, and that's what I'm going to do." Brandon Ryner was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a sentence commensurate with the brutality of the crime he committed. The life sentence without parole is not only a fitting punishment for Brandon Ryner, but also part of the process of bringing closure to Aaron Davis's family and friends. Although nothing can bring Aaron back, holding the perpetrator accountable before the law can bring a sense of peace that justice has been served. This is a testament to the principle that no one can escape the consequences of violent and wicked acts, regardless of who they are or their relationship with the victim. Brandon Ryner's psychological profile, exposed through each step of the case, paints a terrifying picture of a deeply disturbed individual. From the calm deception in the first call to the desperate attempts to conceal the crime, the chilling notes on his phone, and the alarming lack of remorse when arrested, all point to emotional detachment and a lack of empathy. Brandon's unnerving calm, often described as eerily unfazed, may indicate a profound lack of remorse or empathy, characteristics sometimes associated with severe personality disorders. While there may have been mental health issues, his behavior went far beyond the boundaries of mere illness, demonstrating a chilling indifference to human life and a terrifying focus on self-preservation. For Aaron Davis's family, this sentence was an important step. Aaron, a recent college graduate with a bright future, was brutally murdered by his own best friend. Aaron was a recent college graduate and a good kid with a bright future ahead of him. His sudden death is nothing short of an evil, horrifying act on Brandon's behalf, and justice had to be served for Aaron's and his family's sake. Their pain and loss are permanent, but justice brought a certain closure. This is a painful reminder of the fragility of life and the destructive power of violent acts, especially when they stem from seemingly intimate relationships. The Brandon Ryner case is a terrifying wake-up call. It challenges us to look deeply into the nature of friendship, betrayal, and the hidden corners of human psychology. It emphasizes the importance of recognizing warning signs in the behavior of those around us and the necessity of not ignoring manifestations of psychological disorder. At the same time, it is also a reminder of the importance of the legal system in bringing justice to victims and preventing similar violent acts in the future. The story of Brandon Ryner and Aaron Davis is a heartbreaking tragedy, but also a profound lesson in human psychology. What do you think motivated Brandon to act this way? Share your views and reflections on this case in the comments below. If you found these true crime plus psychology analyses helpful and want to explore more stories about criminal psychology, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss upcoming videos. Thank you for listening.